your metric for a great player?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Some people hold over other people, right? They just happen to, like, for example, Shatayasa Oka, one of the greatest players of all time. I just happen to always beat him very badly when we play. The reverse with Kentaro Yamamoto. When I play Kentaro, he just, not only does he play better than me, but he just absolutely holds over me, and I've never beaten him. So,
all right. Well, let's see if you can get some insight into what he does to beat you so soundly. And there you see him looking at a Bogart Brute and an Enigma Drake with his first couple of sifted forward cards here. There you see Salvager Seekers. A lot of cards. They look familiar. We've seen this draft table now 2 other times.
Yeah, Thorn Lieutenant and Gravedigger stand out.
Oh, I didn't even see the Thorn Lieutenant there. Wow.
Thorn Lieutenant and Gravedigger stand out as kind of the traditional best cards. Obviously, Kentaro, you see putting the Bogart Brute to the front. I wonder if that's reflective of a red preference. So very strong red preference, obviously. The Bogart Brute is a card that's a perfectly fine card in sort of the red aggressive strategies, best in red-white. Surprising to see him take it over Thorn Lieutenant and Gravedigger, which are more traditionally powerful cards.
Yeah, Thorn Lieutenant's a terrific card. You see Militia Bugler, the first card shuffled up there. There's Liliana. And you're saying that probably you consider Liliana the weakest of the Planeswalkers in this set?
Yeah,
wow. They've really dealt with the glare very effectively here.
Yeah, almost no glare here, which is excellent.
That's great.
Yeah. And they say sometimes when you're drafting, you should pick 2 colors and put your blinders on. It's a little early for that. Here, I think, if he's taking Bogart Brute first, certainly this would appear to be a clear Bugler, given his, expressed preference for aggressive decks. One thing we were just mentioning, I was talking with Paulo off camera, is that the pros might be a little bit unprepared for this format compared to how they would normally approach a Grand Prix of this nature.
Oh, interesting.
Given that there's a Pro Tour next week in an entirely different format, their attentions are probably pulled in a few different directions. And so it wouldn't shock me if, Kentaro's taking something like Bogart Brute is reflective of him having an archetype that he wanted to draft before he even sat down.
Well, if a first pick Bogart Brute is reasonable, then a third pick one is great. But he's definitely looking at that Rabid Bite and that Vivian's Invocation.
Yeah, I think once you start taking Bogart Brute first pick, I over the cards he took it over, I would be surprised if he were to go into a different direction now. And one of the things that I've noticed, in Limited is that the more comfortable I become with the format, and I think that a lot of other, competitive players are like this, the less they express color preferences, the more they feel like, okay, I can go into any archetype and feel comfortable drafting it. So really early on, if you haven't prepared extensively, you may just have 1 or 2 decks that you know how to draft well, and so you're going to do everything you can possibly do to get yourself into those archetypes. So
make a stand over Take Vengeance, Gallant Cavalry.
Yeah, the best card for red-white here is Gallant Cavalry.
Yeah, I love that card in this deck. He was also looking at the Aerial Engineer.
Right. You need some degree of the Make a Stand, Inspiring Charge, Trumpet Blast effect, but those are largely fungible. Those are largely replaceable effects, whereas Gallant Cavalry is like a must-have. You need the high-quality, produce 2 types of threats type of cards.
Well, Kentaro Yamamoto made a stand there. He took that first, and it's the weakest of the Trumpet Blast effects, despite the fact that it has that ability to make your creatures indestructible.
Yeah, the one nice thing about Make a Stand is that he does have 2 copies of Bogart Brute, so if his opponent's trying to set up something like a double block with 2/2/2 creatures, Make a Stand, is a nice clean 2 for 1. So not an indefensible pick, but not the one I would have made.
All right, well, Dark Dweller Oracle is at the front of the pack right now, and lowers his curve a little bit here, and just a really solid card, especially in a red-white deck, which you might end up with a lot of tokens or Gallant Cavalries or things like that let you really exploit that ability to get some extra cards.
Yeah, and I've seen this card, this Dark Dweller Oracle, people really undervalue it, I think. I think it's quite a strong card, and certainly a kind of card that he's going to be really happy to have. Goblin Instigator, another card that goes really well with the Dark Dweller Oracle. And here...
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we know exactly what Yamamoto's trying to do here. I mean, Make a Stand and Trumpet Blast were just immediately shuffled to the front of their respective packs.
Yes, and here the Trumpet Blast, this is why I don't like necessarily taking something like Make a Stand over Gallant Cavalry.
Yeah, Gallant Cavalry is so essential to this deck.
Mm-hmm.
You just want 2-for-1 creatures if you're going to try to, give this huge bonus to your team. There's that... Well, we see a Marauder's Axe and a Rustwing Falcon. I was going to say there was the Sky Scanner that we talked about earlier. But again, no one's really been, and certainly in the 2 drafts we've watched, no one's really singled that card out at all.
Yeah, and here I think Kentaro is drafting a different type of white-red deck than I would be drafting. Marauder's Axe not the kind of card that I value very highly in these white-red decks. Even though it goes really well with the tokens, I think what you really want to do is just draft as many creatures as possible, and then the things like Trumpet Blast. So I would prefer to have access to Gallant Cavalry, and then something like Sky Scanner or Rustwing Falcon than I would Marauder's Axe and Make a Stand.
Right, so Goblin Motivator and Rustwing Falcon are the two choices here. Goblin Motivator, pretty actually been surprisingly scary card to be up against in this format, because a lot of times, especially certainly as my drafts have slowed down a little bit, having your opponent be able to come out of the gate with that card can be a little intimidating. And nothing really here, and Invoke the Divine probably for his sideboard.
Yeah, I actually
Salvager Secrets and Cancel just going around the table, though.
I actually quite like Rustwing Falcon, probably unsurpringly to people out there in these go wide Boros decks. But it's not a bad idea to pick up the first motivator, especially Volley Veteran is the kind of card that probably only your deck is going to want at the table. And so being able to have a few goblins in place so that if you do pick up one of them, that they end up being pretty good.
So Sure Strike over Take Vengeance. Take Vengeance, a card that seems to have steadily gone down in value over the course of this draft format.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, what Take Vengeance does in your Boros deck. Wow, Leonin War Leader late. That's exactly the kind of... Leonin Vanguard, excuse me.
That card's great in this deck.
Great, and part of the reason why you really need those Gallant Cavalries and the Rustwing Falcons and that sort of thing to trigger these sorts of abilities. Take Vengeance we talked about yesterday. It's the kind of card, if you end up in your pile for a Boros deck, you should not be cutting it from your deck, but I think that Kentaro correctly takes Sure Strike over it. You would value something like Sure Strike more because it allows you to stay aggressive.
But I think if this draft happened the day after the pre-release, that's probably not the pick most people make.
This is kind of interesting, right? Here he is a Loxodon Linebreaker that he probably will not play, doesn't want to play. You'd rather have more Boggart Brutes, and then two cards that are pretty good against his deck. So, unfortunately, you can't take both of them. So,
he could end up with a Johnny's Pridemate or something
Sure.
like that. Fountain of Renewal, not a terrible card in that deck. If you end up with one or two Pridemates, you get to cycle it later on for a card. You don't have a lot of velocity in these red-white decks.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just want to be able to dig, and you get a little bit of value out of it.
I think it is the weakest in red-white of all the different archetypes. Though,
you absolutely need like two Pridemates minimum to make that work.
The reason being that it's not... There's never a turn on Boros that you want to take off from beating your opponent down to draw a card. And so even though it has that clause on it, it acts as kind of functional card disadvantage for long enough in the key turns of the game when you need to be establishing kind of a dominant position. So Kentaro, he's settled into white-red, made a few picks different than I would have in terms of pursuing his strategy.
The Gallant Cavalry is the big moment in that draft in terms of just having enough creatures to really exploit the Trumpet Blast and the Make a Stands.
Yep.
That Make a Stand might have come back.
Possibly, yeah. But it's more that it's that card versus Inspired Charge versus Trumpet Blast are almost interchangeable. I mean, Make a Stand is in some narrow situations quite a bit better, obviously, whereas...
And again, you talked about double Bogart Brute.
Exactly.
Feeling like he has some real incentive for that card where his opponents are going to be compelled to double block at some point.
The other surprising card to me was the Marauder's Axe. That's a card we've seen players both in Sacramento and here in Minneapolis continue to value very highly. I'm more aligned with the Owen Turtenwald school, which is that, equipment in general is just not the kind of thing that you want to include in your deck. There are certain situations where it ends up really shining, but it's so frequently card disadvantage, where it's just you're trading off anyway and it really doesn't have enough effect. And especially that equip cost of 2 is a big ask in a deck that wouldn't want to play, about 16 lands and stay low to the ground.
It's like the world's slowest Trumpet Blast. Every creature will eventually get +2, +0. They may die along the way.
I have a general rule when I'm drafting quote-unquote go-wide decks, which is that basically every single card in my deck should be a creature, ideally a creature that makes more than one creature, a way to produce tokens, or a way to amplify multiple creatures at the same time. So, look, if you have to put a Marauder's Axe or a Short Strike in your
but
deck...
really, what do you know about those decks, Paul?
Yeah, maybe I'm not the right person to be having this conversation, but if you have to put a Marauder's Axe or a Short Strike in your deck, it's not the end of the world, but they're cards that should incidentally end up in your draft pile, not ones that you should be taking over things that are kind of central to your strategy.
So it'll be interesting. We'll certainly get to watch these players through the draft. It'll be interesting to see how that make a stand plays out once Kentaro has his deck assembled and gets to actually put it in action. And again, now I know you talked about in the blue-black decks you don't care about creature count. What about in these red-white decks? Like, where are you looking to be in terms of creatures? Because that's what this deck is essentially about.
Yeah, it's as many as possible is the real answer, because you're almost certainly going to end up with some way to reward you for going wide. You really can't get enough creatures. You can't get enough things like Gallant Cavalry and Goblin Instigator. There's not an amount of Gallant Cavalries and Goblin Instigators. I'm like, that's it. I don't want any more of that. There's not enough Knightly Valors out there where it's like, oh, nope, that's enough tokens for me. You want to just continue making tokens because as opposed to, say, counter magic, right, where we talked about the marginal utility of the first versus the second versus the third, they get even better, these tokens, as you go wider.
Oh, wow. There's a Vivian Reed. There's Herald of Faith. Wow. Angel of Dawn. And an Electrify. I mean, Herald of Faith, just such a amazing card. Not necessarily showing off and go wide. I like the Angel of Dawn here actually quite a bit for the go wide strategies.
Yeah, I think that the standard pick here would be Angel of Dawn, but I don't have a high degree of confidence on this pick as opposed to some of my other opinions. So I think that there's an argument to be made for Electrify and Herald of Faith.
It looks like he has identified the Angel as the card that he's interested in. But yeah, you could take any of those three cards, and they're all three guaranteed to make your deck. Mm-hmm. All cards you're going to be pretty happy when you draw them on curve.
I promise not to mention this after this one last time, but you think about a deck that now has Militia Bugler, Angel of the Dawn, and Trumpet Blast, and boy, would he like to have that Gallant Cavalry back. That's the last time I'll mention that until the next time.
Well, there's another Militia Bugler, so you get one more opportunity to mention it.
I won't.
Oh, there's a Gallant Cavalry. But this does not seem to be a card that Kentaro likes, because he's not even shifted it near the front either time he's had the opportunity to pick it. So it's clearly a card he does not value as highly as you do, and he goes for a Militia Bugler, which is a less consistent 2-for-1.
Yeah, well, one thing you need to be careful of and cognizant of at all times when drafting these Boros decks is your mana curve, certainly. And we saw Steve Rubin get in some trouble in Sacramento drafting a Boros deck where he was just completely flooded with 4-drops. It was just 4-drop after 4-drop after 4-drop, and then he started taking Fire Elementals, and it was just not exactly the kind of Boros deck you want to draft.
Right, there's a Fiery Finish, Trusty Spark. There's a third Militia Bugler. There's a Cavalry Drill Master. And again, you're talking about curve. Yeah. And optionality. Yeah,
I think the Bugler would be better in most decks, but again, he's got so many 3-drops at this point. The Drill Master would certainly at least be defensible, right. but the Buglers combo with each other too, right?
Two Buglers and 2 Bogart Brutes right now at the 3,
right.
At least. He's also thinking about that Goblin Motivator.
Has to be pretty happy with the way this is looking, right? All of the best cards in the pack go into his deck, and he's not looking at...
wow, Militia Bugler number 3 for him.
And again, that's a totally reasonable pick. It's certainly the highest power level card in the pack. Not that, we're going to mention the past, but at this point, he would love to get past a couple Gallant Cavalries.
It's an Aether Shield Artificer, not something that's going to find a home in his deck. I kind of like Tormenting Voice just as something to do late game. There's an Oresco Swiftclaw.
Yeah, and this is the deck for Swiftclaw. He's got... the Make a Stand that we mentioned earlier, and he's got things like Angel of the Dawn in order to make sure that it can sneak past a one right. power creature. So
I gotta say, even in these aggro decks, I've been a little disappointed with Swiftclaw.
You're never going to be thrilled these days. Yeah, creatures aren't like they used to be, right? They used to be 2-mana 3/1 was such a phenomenal deal. They had to print it in uncommon. Now it's kind of a mediocre common, but in Boros specifically, you need that curve.
I might even be overcompensating just because at some point my brain was conditioned to think these cards were amazing. All right, what do we got here? We got another Oresco Swiftclaw. We've got a Marauder's Axe. We've got a Daybreak Chaplain. What do you like here, Paul?
Yeah, I'm probably just dipping into the Oresco Swiftclaw pool again. He hates to see the Poison Tip Archer. That's certainly a card that you're going to see late occasionally. It's not something that should freak you out.
All right, he is going to take the Swiftclaw. He thought about a second axe, but
yeah, that would not have been strong. You do not want multiple copies of kind of medium power equipment in your deck. They're catastrophic to draw in multiples.
So there's a sideboard Smelt. Just hate draft, a Spider, a Mirror Image, a Ravenous Harpy.
One thing we saw Boros players do last week and I kind of liked was to take these Uncomfortable Chills out of packs like this. Uncomfortable Chill is exactly the kind of card that can ruin some of your big attack steps when you're playing Boros. Giant Spider also the kind of card that's pretty tough against Boros, but certainly very defensible to take a sideboard card for your deck and invoke the Divine.
I mean, he knows he's passed at least one more Otter's Axe.
Right. Oh my god!
Wow, that's amazing. That's like the perfect card for his deck. It does exactly everything you want, right? Heroic Reinforcements. It's 2 creatures to help you go wide, and it's an anthem effect for the turn for all your creatures.
Literally, yeah, it's perfect. I mean, when you see a card like that, you're thinking to myself, maybe I should fly from Tokyo to Minneapolis more often. You know, things are really looking up for Kentaro, and he certainly is in the right colors.
When we started the day actually talking about the draft before, as we were waiting for the players to get ready, we talked about what are the 2-color uncommons that you think are incredibly strong, and this was one of them. Lean in Vanguard and Take Vengeance.
Yeah, Vanguard perfect here, right? It's a card that his 3 buglers can go find. It's a card that goes up to 2 power creature pretty quickly. He'll be really happy to pick up that Leona Vanguard.
The life gain, not irrelevant in a race.
The Leona Vanguard is unassuming, but the total sum of its parts ends up being a pretty attractive package for 1 white mana.
Wow, a Viashino Pyromancer, super late here.
And another card that can be found with those 3 copies of Militia Bugler. So really excited to pick up Viashino Pyromancer.
He's thinking about Dwarven Priest, though. Interesting. Takes the Dwarven Priest over, and then maybe that's a curve consideration where he feels like he's got enough creatures, up to, between 1 and 3 and just doesn't have anything at 4. Is that something?
Yeah, possibly. It's a unique kind of pick. I guess if you get into maybe a Boros Mirror, it's a card that he's going to want to have. I would be surprised if his final deck wants to start a 4-mana 2/4 because he's trying to beat down so aggressively. Whereas seems like Viashino Pyromancer was kind of an ideal fit for his strategy.
Well, this turn he does take a creature with reach. He takes a Giant Spider.
Okay. Yep.
After passing the Pyromancer.
Yep. And certainly the Giant Spider really strong against his deck. So you want fewer of those floating around the multiverse as possible.
And here's a late Aether Shield Artificer. He might just take a Totally Lost, but he'll take the Artificer. Just a Hell Giant in his deck.
I don't understand the hatred for Totally Lost out there in the marketplace. I mean,
people are not interested in this card at all. I like to have 1 in my blue decks.
Yes. Yesterday we saw consistently in sealed deck people were playing blue and not starting Totally Lost, and then getting beaten to death by oaken-formed creatures. It was crazy. I mean, Totally Lost is a poorly costed card. It is an overcosted card. But man, maybe we're just too grizzled here. But you don't look interaction in the mouth.
Instant speed. It's in the color where you're often going to have untapped mana on your turn. I like the card. I don't love it, but I kind of always play 1, and I certainly am aware of them in my sideboard.
Right.
Like even if I don't think it's going to make my deck, I'm like, okay, I'll just hold on to this in case I need it.
Absolutely, and when combined with things like cancel, all of a sudden now you have an answer to a resolved Planeswalker, or something of that nature. So
yeah. All right, so here we go. Let's take a look through these first 2 packs. And see what Yamamoto has to work with for his triple Militia Bugler deck.
He's going to be really happy with this start, I think. He very clearly, as evidenced by the late Heroic Reinforcements, is in the right colors. And what he really wants to pick up this booster to go with Heroic Reinforcements, Make a Stand, and Trumpet Blast are creatures that are ways to make 2 creatures with 1 card.
We talked at the outset what a pro-experienced draft table this is, and you also really see that where the players are able to sort of find their colors and stay within those lanes. Once obviously everyone is sort of cooperating with the players around them. We haven't seen any of the drafts that have been real train wrecks.
Right. Kentaro, certainly plenty of playables, certainly happy with his mana curve, and in a very clearly defined strategy. What he wants to do here is round out about the edges. He's got 2 copies of Resco Swiftclaw and 2 Goblin Motivators currently in his main deck. He'd like to filter those into being more like 26th cards, than
or at least one of each.
Right, exactly.
Right now, 14 cards that will put a creature onto the board.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's actually 13 creatures and 1 heroic reinforcements.
He's in a really great spot going into the 3rd booster because the cards that he most wants are at common. So he wants things like Gallant Cavalry and Goblin Instigator, which are not very difficult to pick up. Of course, if he opens something like a Resplendent Angel or an Ajani or a Demanding Dragon, he'd be thrilled to have access to those cards as well. But he doesn't need them in order to make a coherent, playable, or powerful deck, which is exactly where you want to be going into Pack 3. Tons of flexibility to draft for what your deck is looking for.
All right, we will be looking over that shoulder in just a minute at the 3rd pack. You see he's got it laid out in front of him.
Very orderly and clean. I like that.
Yeah, you see some players, they just kind of like splash the pot, as it were,
yes,
with their cards.
Kentaro, very serious, meticulous, careful player. Intimidating presence at the table. He always seems to be in control of what's going on.
Wow. Mystic Archaeologist there. Well, Pegasus Courser, really nice nice card for his curve, nice card for the deck. Makes those Aresco Swiftclaws into pretty relevant creatures.
Exactly.
They have some utility beyond turn 3.
Pegasus Courser, in one sense, is exactly the right card for him because of the Aresco Swiftclaws. It's another 3-drop, so he's not thrilled to pick up a 6th 3-drop that he's interested in playing, which is why we mentioned kind of other spots in the curve as being more of a focus. So a slightly disappointing first pick, I would say, on balance, but you're always happy to have Pegasus Courser in your deck.
You're never going to take a Havoc Devils over it. And that was really the only other real card for him there.
No. And I think that's part of the evolution of the format. Last week we saw Steve Rubin taking Havoc Devils very highly and taking lots of them. It's come down in a lot of players' estimation.
Lightning
this week.
Strike, you talked about those premium commons and uncommons. Wow, this is going to be a real interesting dilemma here for him. Lightning Strike or Starcrowned Stag. It's got to be Lightning Strike.
It has to be Lightning Strike. The Stag is attractive, and you obviously want to have as many Stags as you can, but Lightning Strike is just too good. It's one of the absolute premium uncommons, and 3 damage for 2 mana is just an incredible rate for a removal spell. He happens to be light on removal spells in general, so he would love to take both, but this is obligatory.
And also a card that can end the game.
Right.
Right. A lot of times with these, we've said go wide a bunch of times. There's a lot of times you can get your opponent to 2 or 3, and then you're within a top deck of killing them off of something like a Lightning Strike.
Absolutely. He agonized over that pick. You could see right at the last second he was considering it, but good disciplined pick by Kentaro.
Well, Bogart Brute number 3 and 3-drop number 7 potentially here. Oh, wow. There's a Johnny's Last Stand.
I have not really been able to wrap my mind around a Johnny's Last Stand, so I don't have really a strong opinion about it. It's pretty likely he's going to have a creature die, but it's somewhat of a slow 4/4 flyer. Does he want a 7th 3-drop? I think it's questionable, but obviously we've seen he really highly values the Bogart Brute, right?
It was his first pick.
First pick over Gravedigger and Thorn Lieutenant. So I guess once you're establishing that as the baseline power level, he has the biggest bashing stick, so it's a safe bet he's going to take the leader.
All right, so number 3. There's a Sarkhan's Unsealing. This is absolutely not the Sarkhan's Unsealing deck you were looking for. I think this is going to be an easy Electrify.
He filtered through this booster, and it was looking very barren until he got that Electrify. None of the things that we talked about.
He has Active Treason also sorted up there. Given it preferential treatment, it's at least close for him here.
Definitely close. I mean, we know for sure he's at least past something like Herald of Faith, which is really difficult for his deck to beat. So,
I'm assuming he took the Electrify there.
I
couldn't quite make it out. He did a little.
Yep, he's got the blinders on again.
There's Gallant Cavalry. This is a card we've talked about a lot. He has no choice but to take it here. There's literally nothing else for him.
Well, there is a mare, but
I'm not a big fan of.
Yeah, he's not going to take that.
That's not the horse I want in this race.
I'm partially happy for Kentaro and partially a little upset that he got so dramatically rewarded for passing up the first one. So exactly the card he wants. Obviously,
wow.
It's so fantastic with the 3 buglers, so fantastic with his trumpet blast and his heroic reinforcements, taking his deck to really another level. I think getting that first copy of Gallant Cavalry is so valuable here.
All right, there's Tormenting Voice. There's a Havoc Devils. And, another Invoke the Divine. Probably doesn't want that. Maybe thinking about hate drafting something here. But now he's going to take the Devil. Oh, he's considering just cutting an Aviation Pioneer.
Aviation Pioneer, pretty annoying sizing against his Oresco Swift Claws. Havoc Devils is a card that I would say is something like 30% to make his deck at this point. So
he goes with the 30%er.
He goes with the 30%er, and again, we've seen when Ken drafted, now also with Kentaro, defensively drafting is just not a path to long-term success. You're too unlikely to play against that specific card in a specific situation in which you gain more value than giving yourself the equity of the pick for your deck.
But again, if there's nothing in the pack,
nothing in the pack, or it's literally truly a card that you cannot beat, then occasionally it's the kind of card that you will take.
I think the card that's often visualized in these scenarios is Wrath of God.
Sure, something like Wrath of God, or even more so for one of Kentaro's decks, like a Yahenni's Expertise, right? Because that would kill all of his creatures, but not any of his opponents.
So there's a Spark-Tongue Dragon. He's just going to take that. Very unlikely to be able to kick that in his deck.
It doesn't seem like Kentaro has one of those 17-land Boros decks. It seems more like a 16-land deck. And in the 16-land deck, you don't usually want to include Spark-Tongue Dragon because 5-mana 3/3 flyer is a little bit under rate.
So Daybreak Chaplain, Havoc Devils, just winding down here. Probably has more than enough playables. Daybreak Chaplain, a card you may want to consider bringing in against certain decks, even if you don't start it.
Absolutely, it's good for a few reasons. You could sideboard it in potentially like a Boros mirror. You don't necessarily want your opponents to have it against all of your Leonin Vanguards and oh my
gosh, this is just happy. Is it his birthday? I have to check Facebook because he just got a Star Crown Stag around the table. And by the way, to get around the table, it had to go through Craig Wesco.
I mean, I guess
that's like Craig Wesco's Patronus right there.
I'm speechless. That's crazy. I mean, look at the picture. Look at those antlers.
Icy antlers.
We've just seen. I think both Grand Prix, the story has been people just beating people senseless with Star Crown Stags, and he just got one. What was that, 10th pick or something?
Oh my gosh,
crazy. Well, now he's thrilled. That really was even another level for his deck. And
even gets a Swift Claw here very late if he wants it again. Is there some number of Swift Claws where you're just in this kind of deck where you won't play him? Is 3, your upper limit? Are you like I'm probably not going to play the 3rd? He even gets the Lightning Mare back.
Yeah.
So every card we've talked about him potentially taking, he's gotten back.
Swift Claws, I would like to play 0. I'll play 1, especially with Pegasus Courser. He's really going to just look at his mana curve and make sure that he's got the 5 or 6 2-drops that he really wants at least.
Wow, things could not have worked out better there for Kentaro Yamamoto. Star Crown Stag comes around the table, not 9th, but 10th or 11th there.
Crazy.
That was absolutely ridiculous. Deck ended up looking really good. I think the only quibble you had really there was the Gallant Cavalry.
I don't even remember that pick.
He could have had 3 of them
right.
Along the way over sort of more, I think, replaceable cards. I'll be curious if they make a stand even. It'll almost certainly make his deck. He only has the Trumpet Blast in terms of his. Oh, he also has the Heroic Reinforcements. Wow, and that was a late pick. So, I mean, clearly the right color pair for him to be in. He identified it very early. First pick Bogart Brute was a really interesting pick. Not something we've seen a lot of over the 2 weekends that we've been looking at this limited format.
I haven't heard a lot of people say that they specifically want to be red. I've heard people talk about white, I've heard people talk about blue, and I've heard people talk about green. And Thorn Lieutenant is kind of one of those cards that I love to start on, get myself into green. Thorn Lieutenant, one of the better kind of 2-drops. He valued the Boggart Brute and was richly rewarded for settling on Boros.
But when no one wants to be red, isn't that the time you want to be red? Isn't that one of like the market things we learn about drafting?
It certainly seems like it. And more important than any other concept in Limited is to just be in the right colors. And he was clearly in the right colors for this draft, and his deck ended up, I think, a really nice version of kind of an aggressive Boros strategy.
All right. So there we go. We've watched 3 drafts. Now we're going to watch those drafters play out this draft pod. Don't go anywhere. We've got more Magic coming up right after this.